Hey everyone, this is Faisal. I'm a certified high performance coach and I help entrepreneurs and professionals live happy, fulfilled, and successful lives by raising their performance and potential in everything that they do. Today, I have a very special guest, and this is Jason Goldberg. Say hi, Jason.
What? Hi, Jason. Oh wait, you mean just say hi as me?
Well, you can say hi, Jason, if you like. Jason is an author, speaker, trainer, comedian, rapper, ex-rapper.
Yeah, it's still some. I still do some rapping. It's almost Christmas, so extra rapping is happening.
Oh, that's good. I'm gonna get you to do some rapping too.
Oh God, good luck.
But it's such an honor to have you here, Jason. I've gone through Jason's, I got introduced to him by going through his book, Prison Break, which is right behind him. I can see it right there. It's an amazing book and inspired me so much that I finally got the courage to ask him to come on my show. And we did it. We got him here.
I'm so happy.
For you guys. And we're going to be talking about a lot of things related to self-leadership. So Prison Break, a lot of it goes in from being a prisoner to being a self-leader, and Jason's gonna go more into that. But before we jump into the interview, into the content of it, I just want to ask Jason to tell you guys a little bit about his story, how he got to where he is, because he has a very interesting story, and I love his story, and I love the way he tells it. So go ahead, Jason.
Well, thank you very much, Faisal. It's an honor to be here, man. I'm so happy you reached out, and I'm so honored that you had taken the time to read the book or listen to the book. It's the same thing. I think you can just say read. Like people are always like, oh, should I say read or listen? Listen, you consume the book. So however you did it, that's great. I love it.
Very well. 3 times.
Yeah, 3 times. That's amazing. That you've read it more than I have. And I wrote the damn thing. So no, I love that though. I really appreciate that. And as for me, I don't know what parts of my story you want me to tell, but it's been a crazy long story, a crazy long journey, a lot of reinvention, which I'm sure a lot of people listening can resonate with. You know, having things happen in your world or decision points in your life where you know something doesn't feel right or you know something is off, and so it's very, very freaking scary to make those changes. But it seems like anytime you make those changes, they always serve you and they serve your greater good. So I've had a lot of reinvention in my life. I was raised by a single mother as an only child. So I never had a father, never had brothers or sisters. So I was kind of just, the kid by myself. And I was somebody who from a very young age got made fun of a lot, got picked on a lot because I was always very heavy. I was always very overweight. I was the fat kid from a very young age, from I think right around kindergarten, first grade. So 5, 6 years old, I was kind of a chunky kid, and it got worse and worse and worse up into when I was 29 years old. So back in 2009, I had gotten up to 332 pounds, which is pretty big. I think that's like 150 kilos or something. Like it's like I always have to figure out who I'm talking to, because some audiences they're like stone or kilos or weight. They don't know what. I have to figure it out.
Stone or kilos.
Yeah. I had one person who was like, I don't know, what is that in stone? I'm like,
I think that's in Britain, right? They still go by stone. Well, the good thing is Canadians because of Americans, we have to learn both of them in school. We have to learn the imperial and the metric.
We Americans are the worst. Anyways, so I had gotten up to be very, very heavy. But, at the same time, it's like, even though I was very, very heavy and was morbidly obese, like dangerously obese, really, dying a slow death because of how big I was, it wasn't like I was like on the street and homeless. I had gotten into technology very early on. I got into information technology. And by this point in my late 20s, I had been in technology for almost 15 years at that time. I guess more like 12 or 13 years at that time. And I was the director of engineering and operations for a tech firm. I was making well over $100,000 a year in my 20s. I was the youngest director they ever had in the company. So I was doing great. But as so many of us know, and if you've never experienced this or you don't consciously know you've experienced it, you definitely have, is when things seem to people on the outside like they're going perfectly well. Everything is your life is perfect. On the inside, it may not feel that way. And sometimes that's hard, dude. Like I don't talk about this part a lot, but like sometimes it's hard because we don't like to admit when we're struggling on the inside when things look good on the outside. Sometimes that's because we don't want to look weak, but I think a lot of times it's because we feel like, how dare I be like ungrateful? Like how dare I not be happy about my life. I'm making all this money, or I have this partner, or I have this car, or I have this house, or I have my family, or I have my health, or I have whatever I have. And those things on the outside are great. And we feel guilty to be like, but I don't like the way life feels. Like it sucks. It's not a good daily experience of life. And that became my experience of life, that it got just so bad where every day, didn't matter how much money I was making. It didn't matter what car I was driving. It didn't matter what house I had. I had so much, besides my physical weight, I had so much other types of weight that I was carrying around. I had this like emotional weight. I had this mental weight. I had financial weight, like worrying about money, even though I was making a lot of money. It's like, there's no amount of money that makes you financially secure. It's all a mindset. And I didn't know any of this stuff. So at the time, I didn't know any of this stuff. I wasn't into personal growth. I didn't read for fun. Like that wasn't something I did. So I walked around every day making good money, having, being married and having a nice car and having a nice house, and kind of wishing that I was dead, and really having these suicidal thoughts and just being angry and sad and depressed all the time. And so where that really came to a head, and I'm kind of condense this a little bit, but where that came to a head is I had this experience in 2009 when I was working in this job and when I was at this very high weight. And you can read all the details of the story in the first chapter of Prison Break. I lay it out there. But there was this really pivotal moment in my life where, for the first time ever, I could not ignore the universe, or God, you call it whatever you want, God, the universe, spirit, intuition, inner knowing, whatever you want to call it. There was something that was being presented right in my face. And for the first time ever, I couldn't ignore it, right? I tried to like get around it. I tried to make excuses. And for whatever reason, thank God, I just couldn't. And it was like I was on a burning platform. Like I was on this platform that's like 200 feet off the ground, and I'm standing in the middle of it, and it's a small platform, and somebody sets it on fire, and either I'm going to burn to death or I'm going to jump, and I'm going to do something different than what I've been doing with my life. And that was the big point where I turned my life around by starting to dive into personal growth, starting to take control of my life, starting to realize where I wasn't taking personal responsibility for the way my life looked, that I was being a prisoner of circumstance. And all of that transformation is what led to me writing the book Prison Break and getting into this world of coaching and speaking and training and all the stuff that I get to do now, and get to have so much fun, working with people in the world now.
Yeah, that's an awesome story, and it kind of reminds me of what I went through, and what you said. You were kind of on that hot platform. You couldn't get rid of it. It's funny. I'll tell you, about 3 years ago or so, I had the same feeling. That's when I actually went into personal growth more and more.
Oh wow!
I was working at a job, and I studied at the time mechanical engineering. I was working as a supervisor somewhere, and at that time, for some reason, I was growing fast, and I could be anywhere I wanted to. I could do anything I wanted to at that time. But for some reason, I couldn't shake this thought of being in front of people and speaking. And what's weird about that is that I couldn't even speak in front of people. What I'm sitting here right now in front of you and talking this, like if I did that in the past or 3 years ago, I wouldn't be able to breathe. So wow. Actually, when I started doing YouTube videos, I actually had to train myself. And I remember the first video that I did, it was a 3-minute video, and it's still, I think, on YouTube. It took me 4 hours to complete. Wow. And the first time I turned on the camera, I'm looking at it, and I was staring at it for like a good 5-10 minutes. And my wife's sitting there. She's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I don't know."
That's so perfect. What are you doing? I don't know, because none of us know. None of us know what we're doing until we know what we're doing. I love that you said that. That's so perfect.
Yeah, and it's so amazing what you said, that you couldn't shake it. It's something that came from within you, and it's like no matter how much you get away from try to get away from it, you can't. You had to go towards that. And I love that. And another point you brought up, I really love what you said about how people have, on the outside, they look great. And I know quite a few people, from family members to friends to acquaintances, that on the outside, they look great. But if you know a little bit about their life, they're struggling. They're struggling emotionally. They're struggling with their thoughts. They're struggling with their relationships. They're struggling with their idea of life. And no matter how great they look, it doesn't matter. The reality is that they're not living the life that they want. And what you said, on the outside, no matter how much they want to express themselves, they can't, because social structures don't allow them to. They either feel guilty about saying that, well, I have all this stuff, but I still feel miserable, or they have something else within them that's not letting them express that. And I actually hear a lot of that stuff going around, coming from an Eastern world. My parents came from a war-torn country, and we've gone through a lot of stuff, poverty there, all those things, and came down here. And a lot of people who come from there, when people here complain, they're like, oh, it's first world problems. Like,
right.
That doesn't make any sense, because problems are relative. Unless
Yes.
they've experienced being under a bomb, it doesn't mean anything to them.
Right.
And living here for the past, in Canada for the past 18 years, I've realized that your problems are very relative to the circumstances you're in, to the perspective that you have.
It. That's so true, man. Nobody's problems are more important or less important than anybody else's. And there was this thing I heard a long time ago, which was kind of funny too, though, is then when you're ready to shift and actually do something about it, there was this thing somebody said, if the entire world got into a circle and they were able to take their problems out of their head and put them into the middle of the circle where everybody saw each other's problems, most people would go ahead and take their own problems back and leave, right? Like if they saw what everybody was dealing with and they thought their problems were the worst thing in the world, they would look at everybody else and be like, never mind, I'll take my problems. Yeah, I'll deal with my own. You guys keep yours. I thought yours was easier than mine. Forget it. I'd rather just deal with mine. And that's what it is. It's all relative, man. It's all relative.
Yeah, and another similarity that we have, that I was thinking about when I was reading your book, because you had a lot of coach perspective, because you have worked with people, and as a coach myself, the amount of when you learn the details in people's lives, and I thought I knew people, but when you go into the detail of how people think, how people feel, what they do, and what the little thoughts that affect them on a daily basis, the feelings that they can't deal with, the behaviors that they want to implement but they can't, they freeze, then you find this empathy for human beings, and you realize that everybody's struggling with something.
Yeah.
No matter how great they are. I mean, I've worked with executives to stay-at-home mom. People have human problems.
Right.
And that's the other thing. No matter where you come from in the world, and I've worked with people from different cultures, religions, everywhere, they all have human problems. They don't have any other other kind of problems. The problems are them dealing with themselves for the most part, and that translates to them dealing with their environment a certain way. Yeah. And that's where we come to the prison break.
Yeah.
And I love that title. I didn't get it in the beginning, but when I started reading it, I was like, oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, and it's a very popular TV show too. So a lot of people, when I tell them I wrote Prison Break, they go, oh my God, you wrote the TV show? I'm like, no.
No.
different Prison Break. I'm sure it's gotten me some fans accidentally, but yeah, no, totally different Prison Break than a TV show.
Well, I hope they weren't too disappointed reading that. What's going on here?
What's going on? Where's the actual prison? Somebody get me an actual prison. You know, what's funny is that when I wrote the book, though, I actually had one of my friends. Do you know Sean Stevenson? Have you heard of Sean Stevenson before?
Yes, the 3-foot giant.
3-foot giant, yeah. So he's one of my best friends, and when I told him about the book, he said, you can't call it Prison Break because you've never been in prison. You've never been incarcerated before. And so I was like, oh man, like I get that, but I was like, I'm going to do it anyways. And then it was awesome because then I found his TED Talk, and I reference it in the book. I found his TED Talk where he was actually doing a TEDx in a prison, and he was talking to people in the prison, and he said, I meet people outside of these walls who are more imprisoned than all of you who are inside of these walls. And that's where it really drove home for me that, yes, this book needs to be called Prison Break. And I actually finally, just earlier this year, the book came out at the end of 2016. So it's been about 2 years now since the book came out. Finally, about 8 months ago, I guess. Yeah, about 8 months ago, I finally actually got to go work in a prison and work with, I went to the Pelican Bay prison, which is the only super maximum security state prison in California. It's way up in Northern California, and got to work for an entire weekend with people who are, kind of the hardest of hardcore criminals who are trying to turn their lives around while they're in prison. And it was a beautiful, beautiful experience. And if you want to think about how we're much more alike than we are different, that is an experience that changed my perspective on human beings more than I ever thought possible. Because we did this exercise where it was called Step to the Line. And so there's about 150 inmates, and we don't call them inmates. We actually call them EITs, entrepreneurs in training, because we're actually teaching them how to be entrepreneurs. They create businesses. They do a business plan competition. Like it's absolutely amazing. And these are guys that are like full face tattoos and they're up there pitching about, the food truck they want to start, and they know about their cost of goods sold, and they know about the licensing, and they know about marketing, and they know all this stuff. And it's amazing to watch them transform. But there's about 130 EITs that are on one piece of tape along the ground, along the entire gymnasium. And there were about 30 of us as volunteers and as coaches, as mentors, that were lined up on a piece of tape in front of them, about 5 feet away from them. And the facilitator of this exercise would call out these different things and say, I've had one or more of my parents died before the age of 18, or I've been arrested for drunk driving, or I've done something that I should have been arrested for, but I wasn't. And they start calling these things out. And if it pertains to you, if it's true for you, you stay on the line. If it's not true for you, you take 5 steps back. And what we started seeing was that there were so many times where the EITs, the people in prison, and us, the volunteers, were on the line together, that we had experienced the exact same thing they did. So they weren't these people that we couldn't relate to, and how could they ever do what they did? And they can't be real humans. They must just be terrible people. And then we realized, crap, we have a lot more in common than we thought. And people are crying and they're hugging and there's all this stuff going on. And it's just a beautiful display of if we really focused on what you said, empathy, compassion, humanity, people who feel seen and heard, people who are lit up about their lives, they don't want to do bad stuff to other people. They don't want to harm other people. They want to improve the lives of other people. So if we can really start practicing that, that's probably one of the biggest prison breaks we can do as a consciousness, is to practice more of this empathy, this compassion, this love for humanity, and this understanding that we're far more alike than we are different.
Yeah, that's really awesome. And I've actually only heard of, I think, Tony Robbins, who went into training in the prison. But so was that a seminar that you went into?
So it's actually a company, and I would definitely check it out for anybody. They're not just in California; they're all over the U.S. For anybody who's in the U.S., I don't know if they're in Canada. I'm not sure. There's probably regulations.
Might be. A lot of the companies are here too.
Yeah. So the company is called Defy Ventures, DEFY, Defy Ventures, and I think it's defyventures.org is the website. And they actually create these programs inside of prisons across the country. And then people like me will come in there and apply to be a volunteer. They look at your background, they look at kind of where you came from and what you've done. And if they think it's a good fit, then they'll invite you in and you get to be with them for a whole weekend and mentor them. And it's intense, man. It's really intense, but it's beautiful. I'm going to go back again. It was amazing.
That's really awesome. And you brought up such an amazing point, because as human beings, we often judge other people because of their circumstances where they are at. But I don't know who was, I think it was a philosopher or somebody or a researcher said that if you were in that person's position going through all those things, you might have acted either the same or worse than that person. Unless you know every detail of that person's life, you're in no position to judge that person. We don't know what people go through. And I've seen people who are the closest, husband and wife, or brothers, sisters, they don't know much about their life. We don't know much about what people go through in their lives, let alone some person who has a tattoo on the street and you're about to judge them for what they did and what they didn't do. Yeah, I understand that we all have a personal responsibility, but as human beings, we have a social responsibility as well towards each other. So unless we fix our systems, we are in no position to say that, well, that person did the crime because he wanted to, or for whatever reason. But I still believe that there is a personal choice that everybody has to make and can make towards improvement, towards creating a better life for themselves, whatever that looks like to that person. That's where we go back to Prison Break. And I love your definition of a prisoner versus a self-leader. So let's start with that. Like, how did you come up with the, well, you talked about the title, but what's your idea of being a prisoner versus self-leader?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, it's one of those things where I didn't have language for it when I was really in the depths of it, right? It was like, you can always connect the dots looking back, but not going forward, right? And so looking back at my life and how life felt for basically the majority of the first 30 years that I was living it, I was kind of asking myself, like, I wanted to figure out how I could teach this to other people. And I wanted it to be something very simple, right? So like, I would love for everybody to read the book because there's a lot of insights and a lot of things that can help them. But at its core, the entire book is just trying to back up the simplicity of this distinction of being a prisoner and self-leader. So literally what I'm about to say now is all you actually need to practice self-leadership. And if you want to back that up with more examples and more insights and kind of fun tips and hacks and stuff to do that, then great, read the book, but you don't need it, right? So here's the difference. It's not a personality. You're not born as a self-leader or born as a prisoner. It's not something you become once and for all. It is literally a moment by moment choice. And my belief is that in any given moment, given what's being presented to you by the world, right? And when I say what's being presented to you by the world, I know that sounds very like personal growth and self-helpy. When I say personal, what's being presented to you, I mean the circumstance that you're seeing, the circumstance you're facing, the person who shut down your idea at work, or the person who says no to you when you ask them out on a date, or the person that doesn't sign up to work with you as a client, or the company that doesn't hire you or doesn't promote you. Any of these things are things that are being presented to you, right? And we have a choice in any given moment. This is my belief and this is my experience. I'm not saying it's the truth because I don't believe in that. In my experience, in any given moment, I can choose to either be a prisoner of circumstance where my happiness or my sadness is completely dependent upon this outside event, right? Or this outside person or this outside whatever. All of how I feel on the inside is completely dictated by what's going on the outside. I can be a prisoner of circumstance with that, where I'm at the whim of all those things that I mentioned. And the only choice that I have to be happy when I believe that everything outside of me is responsible for my happiness or sadness is to try to mold or modify or manipulate everything around me. And I don't know about you or your listeners, that is a full-time job to try to mold and manipulate and modify everything around me. Not to mention when there's a human being involved, you can't mold, modify, or manipulate people really, at least not for a sustained amount of time. And it doesn't come from the heart and it's crappy and it doesn't work. So not only does being a prisoner or choosing to respond to or react to a situation as a prisoner, not only does it not feel good, it's an inaccurate and ineffective way to be. It's not truthful. So the flip side of this is to be a self-leader. And the difference there is that when you choose self-leadership, you look at what's being presented to you and you treat it like a game of improv, right? You say, given the conditions of the game that I'm being faced with, given that this person just said what they said or did what they did, right? What role do I want to play in creating the experience of the world that I want to experience? Because nobody goes into a meeting and says, man, I really hope somebody shuts my idea down because when I feel depressed, it just makes my life better. Nobody thinks that. Nobody would purposefully choose to be sad, anxious, or depressed. They're only sad, anxious, or depressed because they have a very, what I call SFM, a simple fundamental misunderstanding about how their experience is created. They think it's this outside thing. So when you're a self-leader, you look at the situation. You don't lie to yourself. You don't say, like, if somebody cut you off in traffic, self-leaders don't say, they didn't cut me off in traffic. They liberated me from my speed. Like, it's not about like lying to yourself and coming up with like stupid reframes that are just meant to trick you. It's about looking at the truth of the situation and saying, that person cut me off in traffic. I either choose to make that significant or I don't. When I choose to make it significant, here's what life feels like. It feels anxious. It feels stressed. I want to chase them. I get angry. I get hijacked. I snap at my kid. I snap at my coworker. I snap at my spouse. All these things happen because I choose to make that event or that person significant. If instead I choose to say, oh, interesting, that happened, so what? Not that big of a deal in the grand scheme of things. How would I respond to that thing if it wasn't overly significant? How would I respond to that thing if I didn't make it about me or take it personally? And what comes up there is a level of calmness, of clarity, of creativity that allows you to actually feel what you want to feel, which will allow you to take more purposeful action. This is not just about feeling good so you can feel good. The way you feel, the state of your mental health, your mental being in any given moment directly impacts the action you take, the results you'll get from those actions, and the way you feel about life in general. So if we have that moment by moment choice to either be a prisoner of circumstance where we essentially give away all of our power to somebody who never deserved it to begin with, versus being a self-leader where we say, I own my power, I own my response, I own my creativity, and my creativity will always be greater than any circumstance I face. If I go to that second place instead, as much as I can, doesn't mean you'll do it all the time, but as much as I can, if I recognize in that moment, oh, I have a choice right now. I could totally react as a prisoner or I could respond as a self-leader. it will change your entire life. Moment by moment, it will change your entire life.
That's really awesome, and you have it right on point for that, on that one, because many of us, I mean, we always talk about our circumstances, that, well, I got laid off, I got fired, or I don't have the same opportunity as somebody else, or I'm an angry person. You've talked about yourself a lot in that, and
Oh, yeah.
I mean, us being in the personal development, people don't. I personally believe that people who teach these things, they have gone through a lot worse of it, and they're still struggling with a lot of these things. And I'll be a little bit vulnerable right now. And then one of my biggest problems is fear of rejection. And even though mentally I've made peace with it, and I've actually simplified it, and I'm going to go into that with you as well, but it's a feeling that's deep within, and you deal with it. And you find a way to deal with it. And the more you practice the choice that, okay, are you going to act out of that state of feeling rejected, that state of feeling down, or are you gonna feel it and move on?
Yes, exactly.
And you have the choice. And the opposite of that would be that, well, I could sit here for the next 10 years and say, well, I'm depressed.
Right.
Nobody wants me. Nobody likes me, any of those things. And it goes with a lot of things. And we also know of accounts of people who have been in places where the circumstances are far from ideal. They've been in war-torn areas. They've been in concentration camps. They've been in places where an average person cannot imagine to live normally or be able to survive in that area. But they chose a different thing. One of that reminds me of the story of, I got to read his book, but it was told by Tony Robbins, his friend, he wrote a book himself about it too. So he was caught in Vietnam. He was one of the pilots who was shot down, and he was in prison for 7 years. He was put in a 6x6 cell with just a toilet in the corner, and he was tortured and beaten, and he was in isolation for 7 years. 2 other pilots with him were captured too. But that person made a choice. He said that, I don't have anything but my thoughts. And he basically went through all his life and kept up his body, kept doing push-ups. He thought about his life in a different way. He figured out why he is in that place and how he can feel better. And going after that, based on what Tony Robbins says, that after coming out of there, he felt closest to God. According to his belief, he felt stronger than he had ever been. He felt connected to everything in a place where you're isolated. And if you know human nature, we know that human beings are social animals. We cannot sustain isolation for long, and that's one of the worst things you can do to a human being. And then versus his experience versus the 2 other pilots, one of them committed suicide. The other one, I think he went to a mental asylum. And that shows you that it doesn't matter the circumstances. You can make a choice. And that person right now is going out there and making a difference in the world.
Yeah.
And helping other people transform. And
they had to do that moment by moment. That was a moment by, like, every single day they had to, probably multiple times a day. Like for me, I wake up in the morning and I prime myself by reading and doing all these things to make sure that I can be at a high level of consciousness for the day. Imagine what that person had to do every single day. It didn't happen on autopilot, right? It's not something like that person's special because they did that. It's just that person realized they had a choice in how they could, and in how significant they made their thoughts, how seriously they took their thoughts. And I can't imagine being in an environment like that. And that would be, I'm sure that would be a challenge for me. I wouldn't say for a second, oh yeah, well, I wrote a book on, self-leadership, so put me in a camp in solitary, I'll be fine. No, it would be tough as shit. But you make that decision, and that kind of like emotional grit and that resilience is huge. And I love that story. It kind of reminds me also of like Man's Search for Meaning with Viktor Frankl.
Yeah, I gotta read that book. I haven't gotten around.
Dude, I think it's probably like the second or third like personal growth book I ever read. And I remember like, I remember it's right after I had started my first company, and I won't go into all that unless you really want to, but I was working in that company, and I was doing all kinds of things. And one of the things that I did in that company, in my own company, was I was a chauffeur, like no joke. Like I would drive people around because it was a part of the company. And so I remember one night taking one of our clients to some big event they were going to for their kids, and I had to just sit there for hours waiting for them to come out of this event. And so I was reading that book on my Kindle, and it changed my life. It just reminded me so deeply of the power of choice. And a lot of the same things that you're talking about with that prison camp was echoed by him with the concentration camps, where some people said, I'm going to die here. And they did. And he said, there's no way I'm not getting out of here alive and sharing the story. And he did. So it's like whatever you choose to believe. And it's not even about what's true. Like I posted something the other day, you know, and probably something you've heard before about like everything in the world that happens for us and not to us. And somebody responded back, somebody who's a pretty loyal follower of mine who follows a lot of my stuff. And she said, you know what? For the first time ever, I totally disagree with you. There are some things that just happen to you. And I said, great. I totally get that perspective. And at the end of the day, they're both made up. So whichever one actually empowers you to move forward in your life and not be held back, that's the one you should believe. And that's the truth. We're all fabricating stories all the time. Do we want to fabricate stories that empower us or fabricate stories that hold us back?
Yeah, and that's an amazing point. And that's something that I talk a lot about our thoughts. And that's something I had to experience it firsthand, because one of the things with my story is that when I came to Canada, I came from a completely different culture. I was born in Afghanistan. I lived in Pakistan, similar cultures, but very different from the West. When I came down here, we were very excited. New life, new world, so-called better place to live. It's better now. It's my home now. I love it. But it took me about 5-6 years to adjust here. But the initial shock of it was that almost everything that I believed to be true was completely untrue. It was like going, you know, the Twilight Zone, that show, when you go into a place where nothing makes any sense anymore. And the funny thing was, nobody else around me was questioning that. And it was driving me even more crazy, because they came at this around the same time as me, my brothers, my friends, and other people from the same place as me. And they were fine with it. And for a long time, I didn't understand why they were fine with it until I got it. But I had to find my own reasons. One of the ways I did that was I had to put aside all my beliefs, put it on pause. And that was very hard, and figure out what I wanted to believe, what story I wanted to believe, what thoughts I wanted to believe. One of the most important things I've learned, and you discuss this in the book as well, is that what you just said is that most of our thoughts are made up for us. And the thoughts that are in our head, they're not really our thoughts. They're given to us by our parents, by the media, by newspaper, by our teachers, by our friends. And that's an accumulation of all those thoughts. And I was actually listening to one of the lectures by Alan Watts, and he said that if you actually listen closely, and I tried that, you could actually sometimes hear the voice of the person that gave you that thought. Wow. And that was very deep. I'm like, is that possible? And I actually started paying attention, and there are certain things that you've heard over and over. You will hear the voice in your head.
Dude, you know, it's funny you said. That's amazing. I love that. And it's really funny. I have one friend who I won't out their name because people would know who they were. But I have one friend who's probably my toughest love friend. Like there's a lot of tough love that happens between us. And there will be some times where I'll say something, and he knows enough about me to know this. I'll say something that maybe hits him the wrong way. And he'll ask me straight up, am I talking to you or am I talking to Linda? And Linda's my mom's name, right? So he'll say it right. He's like, am I talking to you or am I talking to your mom right now? And I'm like, oh, I hate you so much, but you're right. That's not me talking. That's my mom talking. And I love my mom. There's nothing wrong with her. But, you know, parents are all well-meaning. I was talking to my friend yesterday about this. I said, listen, parents always F up their kids, right? But they just F them up in different ways than they were F'd up by their parents, right? So my mom, I'm sure, did something great with me that her mom didn't do. And by focusing on that, she F'd up something else. There's just no way around that. So this is not about my mom. But I think it's really funny to have a friend who's like, oh, am I talking to you or am I talking to your mom? Because you're right. The voice is there if you listen to it. It's so funny, man. I love that.
Yeah, that's really it. And the funny thing is, such a basic concept, right? But we're not taught that. We're not taught that. We don't even, and you talked about basic misunderstandings. And this is one of the basic misunderstandings in our life, is that we take our thoughts too seriously. And that ends up with us taking ourselves too seriously. It ends up with us taking our environment too seriously. And it comes up with this heavy load on us to live in a way where we're always under some kind of pressure.
Yes.
And that's where I wanted to come to, how you present this material. I love the way you present it, because you talk about playfulness, you talk about creativity, you talk about intelligence, you talk about approaching life in a lighter way, rather than from the perspective of guilt, heaviness, from the perspective of somebody who has to, well, as Alan Watts said, you gotta do that.
Yeah.
It's like you gotta grind, you gotta live that way. And in the past couple of years, I've realized that you don't have to do that.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I want you to talk about that a little bit. How can people approach life in a more playful, in a more relaxed way, rather than in a more from the perspective of a lot of other people in a hustling manner, or in a way where they're always under pressure, and they use that as a motivation, which we both know is not sustainable.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the way most people motivate themselves is through blame, shame, and obligation. That is the main motivator for most people. And there's a chapter in Prison Break called Deep Shame Thrombosis. And it's really like, it's all about this thing about like shaming ourselves into motivation. And I think part of the reason that people don't, so first of all, people I think don't think that they can access levity and playfulness in their work. And listen, I have to always say this, because I don't want people thinking, not because I care what they think, but because I think this would not be accurate and it would not be as effective. I don't want people thinking that when I talk about being playful, it means that like I'm shooting Nerf guns all day, or like I take a break from work and go hit people with water balloons, like, or I have a hula hoop handy. Like all that stuff is great. Like do that if that makes you feel higher consciousness, higher spirit, but that's not me. Like I am a sincere entrepreneur. I work my stuff. I do have some hustle in me. I work hard. I work a lot because I love the work that I do. And that's what I choose to do. But you can do that while still having a spirit of play while you're doing it, right? So I have these bracelets that I wear, these My Intent bracelets, and one of them says Amor Fati, which is Latin for love your fate, kind of a Stoic principle, loving what is, Byron Katie kind of thing. And the other one though says Spirit of Play, and Spirit of Play is my reminder that I have a choice, just like the self-leader prisoner choice. I have a choice in any given moment to take my situation very seriously, right? Or to bring more levity to it, to notice that the more light I can be, the higher consciousness level I can be, the more creative, the higher performing, the more productive that I'll be as well. And I think a lot of people think that that's not responsible. This is actually a word I've heard from people before. So I'll do seminars, and I remember I was with I was at a national sales meeting. So I was doing a presentation to an entire sales team for this company in Texas, based in Texas, that was all about living a not so serious life, right? Which, first of all, I was so happy that corporations are starting to bring me in with the title. Usually I'd have to make a different title and I'd have to sneak in the not so serious stuff. now I just say like living a not so serious life, or how to live a not so serious life. And they're like, yeah, come in. Our people are way too serious. So I love that they're recognizing that. But so I'm doing the seminar, and I basically have up a whiteboard, and I draw a line down the middle of the whiteboard, and I ask them, I say, on one side I put in flow, and on the other side I put ready to blow, right? And these are the two distinctions here, right? And I ask people, what does it feel like when you're in flow? And they tell me all the things. Oh, I feel creative. I feel light. I feel calm. I'm happy. I'm joyful. I'm laughing. I'm collaborative. All these things. I say, okay, cool. And what about when you're ready to blow? I'm anxious. I'm stressed. My chest hurts. I'm hot. I snap at people. All these things. So we have all these things on the list here. And I say, cool. So we know what it looks like when you're ready to blow. And we know what it looks like when you're in flow. And they say yes. And I said, where do you do your better work, right? Where does better work come out from you? On the ready to blow side or on the in flow side? And they said, absolutely in flow. I said, great. Why don't we just choose that more often, right? Because it's just a choice. And they say, well, I feel like that would be irresponsible, because if people see me looking light and happy and playful, they'll think I'm not serious about the work I'm doing. And I said, that's where it is. Yeah. It's that you think it's unrealistic or irresponsible to not be, because if people don't see me like this, then I must not want to move ahead in the company, and I must not care about my goals. And we believe that you have to look like that in order for that to happen. So the distinction I introduced to them is actually an Alan Watts distinction. It's one of my favorite Alan Watts distinctions in the world, is serious versus sincere. Yeah. Okay. The opposite of seriousness is not, disregard. The opposite of seriousness is not aimless playing around and hoping that things work out. The opposite of serious is sincere. I can be really sincere about the work I want to do. I can be really devoted and committed and focused and loving and lasered in on what it is I want to create, but I don't have to take it so seriously. And when I do that, I have access to my high level consciousness emotions, my creativity, my love, my collaboration, my joy, my productivity, my performance. All those things are so much more easily available to me when I'm choosing to be in flow instead of relying on being ready to blow, if that makes sense.
That's awesome. I love that distinction, and I remember that from one of his lectures as well. And I love that there's so many similarities between you and Alan Watson, the way you present it, because he has that humor too. And that's one of the reasons why I love him. And he reminds me of another philosopher. God damn it, I always forget names. Anyway, I'll remember that next time. But he gives you that the teachings very in depth, but he gives it with humor and playfulness, and you absorb it much better. You understand it much better. And like you said, that we always have the choice to either approach life in terms of flow. It's not always an easy choice, and that's what I wanted to talk about as well, is that people who teach these things or people who live these things, it's never easy for them to make that choice of being more relaxed versus being under stress.
Right.
First of all, I personally believe that because our environments inherently are stressful. Like as human beings, we haven't evolved to a point where we create environments that is sustainable for every human being, individual, where they are in a relaxed state. Our environment promotes a state of stress. And like you said, that person that told you that, well, what if I look like I'm not taking things, I'm not being sincere, or I'm taking things too lightly, and that's imposed on us constantly. So what do you do to deal with that? And we don't know that, but we always have that choice, and that choice, like you said, is moment by moment. Sometimes I wake up, I'm not in a great mood. I have feelings and things that come up that I don't even know where they come from. And even if you talk to psychologists, you can talk to them for hours and you might not figure out where they come from, because there might be in parts of your life where you can't even remember them.
Right.
But they're there.
And it's irrelevant. It's irrelevant where they come from. Like, it doesn't even matter. And that's one of the things we get into, that I feel like a lot of personal growth and self-help has become mental masturbation. Where people want to sit there for like hours and days at a time to figure out the why. Meanwhile, their life is passing them by. This thing that they've been gifted. We have a level of intelligence and consciousness that no other being in the world that we know of possesses. And yet we want to misdirect that into the past to figure out where something came from, instead of consciously making choices now and in the future to feel the way we want to feel. And it's one of the things I really want to break people of, is that, it's kind of like the analogy I use, and I don't know if this will resonate for everybody, but for some reason it resonated for me, was at some point, I used to be, I don't do it as much anymore because I don't do it anymore at all, because it's not super healthy. But I grew up loving cereal, right? I just like Lucky Charms and like just all the sugary, disgusting cereals. And you put the cereal in the milk and then you drink the milk because it has all the leftover flavors and all that stuff, right? And I remember one day I was sitting in front of the TV, and this is as an adult, like not even as a kid. I'm in my 20s, and I'm sitting in front of the TV and I'm eating like Lucky Charms. And it occurs to me, like, who ever thought to put milk in cereal? Like, I get it. Like, cereal is typically, it's a little harder and it's maybe not as fun to eat, but why milk? Why not water? Why not whiskey? Why not wine? Why not orange juice? Like, who the hell thought to put milk in cereal? And so the analogy, that the reason I bring up this metaphor here, is because this is what happens a lot in personal growth. Somebody has this thought, I wonder why people put milk into cereal, or in our mind, I wonder why I feel so angry or upset or whatever it is. And then they say, it would be like saying, I'm not going to eat this cereal until I know why people put milk in cereal. There's no way. I'm not touching it. I am not touching this bowl of cereal anymore until I know exactly where the origins of putting milk in cereal came from. Same thing with people. I refuse to live my life and make any choices that would make me feel better and move forward until I figure out the root cause of where this came from. You don't need to do that, right? So for me, I kept eating the cereal while I was Googling why people put milk into cereal, right? It didn't stop me. It wasn't relevant to stop me from eating the cereal. So great, if you want to dive in and like find the why and find the root cause because it's interesting for you, because it would be fun for you to know where it came from, great. But don't think for a second that you need to find that before you can move forward with your life.
Yeah, that's a really awesome distinction, and I realized that the hard way, because I was one of those people who would just sit there and try to figure out, okay, what's the problem?
Me
Why,
too.
what needs to be fixed inside me? And there doesn't, because there's a distinction between, there are people who are completely depressed, who are completely in a state where they probably can't even function properly, but they choose to do certain things. They choose
Right.
to live their life. And that actually starts to transform that, what they feel, that the heaviness, into some, based on their action, into something positive.
Yeah.
But I personally feel like, personally for me, that over the years, I think 95% of what you should do is take action, move on, live your life, because there's no time to waste that. But then 5 to 10%, make sure you're aware how you feel. And I think it's more about feeling the emotions that you feel, rather than trying to figure out the why. Because even the why is made up. It's somebody's idea of why you feel a certain way and where it comes from. And there are so many theories with that. And
Yeah.
a lot of times it comes from your childhood. A lot of psychologists would say that, and you can't even remember that part of your childhood, so it doesn't even matter unless you do regression therapy. You won't even know that it's there. So then, how
Yeah.
do you deal with it? And we
Yeah.
know that the opposite of just sitting there is action. So then
Right.
I want to go into that, is that how do people take action? Because and let's link that to self-worth. I loved your analogy of carrying the ticket in a parking lot. And we're always waiting for somebody to give us that approval. Well, can I start my business? Can I get that job? Can I ask that girl to marry me? Can I ask this entrepreneur to come on the interview with me? By the way, you inspired me to ask you. So
That's awesome. But see, you took action.
I did.
You didn't just read it and make it information in your head that was fun to play with and more mental masturbation. You got into action, and look what happened. That's exactly it. So you're a perfect example of that. And I'm sure you do that all the time. It's not just with this, but no, but it's such a true thing. And so a couple things there. So number one, I always say, if you ever feel down, then that means you need to get up to something, right? If you're feeling down, get up to something, because sitting there in a place of inaction, it only leaves you with your thoughts. And while there is work you can do, and I mean that literally, like the work, like Byron Katie, for example, love her stuff. It's a big part of my life. And I use it I use it on myself, and I use it with clients in my own way. I don't usually take them through the 4 questions so much anymore, but great thing to look up to challenge your thoughts. But sometimes the ego is so prevalent that you can't just shift into that place right in that moment. It just doesn't feel like it's available to you. So sometimes just getting into action, like I know one of the things that I would do when I was feeling really down is I would go to Starbucks and I would buy myself a coffee, and then I would buy like a $5 gift card, right? Enough for a cup of coffee or for a latte. I'd buy a $5 gift card. And instead of giving it to some random person, I would actually give it to the barista. I would give it to the cashier at Starbucks and say, sometime during your shift, you are going to choose somebody who gets a free coffee, and you're going to pay for it with this gift card, right? So I buy the gift card, and then I get to feel the dopamine hit of doing something nice for this person, and the extra dopamine hit of knowing they're going to do something nice for somebody else. That it's a part of the act that they're going to have to pay it forward. And then they get super lit up because they're like, I get to choose whoever I want. I'm like, yep, you choose whoever you want in this entire shift. And sometimes I'll sit in Starbucks and I'll like work, and I'll actually hear them do it. And the person who receives it is like, oh my God, are you serious? Like, you're paying for my coffee? And it's just like that kind of thing, getting into action on that. What it really does, and this is really something that's a part of, Buddhism, and the Dalai Lama talks about this a lot, is that one of the things that can make us the most successful in our lives and in our experience of life is to diminish our own self-importance as much as possible, right? Diminish our own self-importance, not to think less of ourselves, not to not take care of ourselves, but to not make everything about us. We are so good. And when I say we, I mean me. This is all the stuff I'm talking about, Faisal. I'm sure you know this, are all things that either I've been challenged by or continue to be challenged by. And
we're included in whatever we're teaching.
Yeah, yes. For everybody listening,
too.
Yes. For everybody listening, I am not the sage on the stage that has it all figured out. I have my own little anxiety attacks multiple times a week and have to do all this work on myself. But anytime I can diminish my own sense of self-importance, whether that's getting out and doing something for somebody else, or even I kind of got rid of my gratitude practice for a while and started a compassion practice, where in the morning I would pick a few people from my life and I would send them love and wish something really amazing happens for them today, and wish that any suffering they have be greatly reduced or completely eliminated by the end of the day today. And I would just send this out to people every morning. And so it wasn't about me and what I was grateful for and all the things that I had and the things that I should care about. Me, 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 me. It was about getting out of the me and really focusing on other people. So that's a big part of it for me, I think, is also just is diminishing your own self-importance. But the other thing that I think can be really helpful to shift. So say you're in this place where you're feeling really sad, or you're feeling really anxious, or feeling really heavy, or whatever it is. There's this technique, that this kind of tool that I created that actually didn't even make it in the book because I created it after the book was already written. I should do an addendum and add it to the book. It's called a PBQ, or a prison break question, right? And so a PBQ is a question, and there's as many PBQs as there are people, and then more, because you make them up for yourself. But the goal of a PBQ is to take something that is a problem currently and make it no longer problematic, right? And so the format for that question, if there was a format to use, it's very simple. It's, if I knew, what would I do? Right? If I knew, what would I do? And so if anytime you're feeling stressed or angry or heavy or whatever, and you want to start feeling that shift, ask yourself a prison break question. So for example, when I first created this tool, it was like most of the things I've created, it was out of necessity for me. It was something I needed to deal with, and it occurred to me and it worked. And so then I started sharing with other people. I was feeling this fear of being rejected. Funny enough that you brought this up, right? And this is actually coming up for me again now because I'm starting to date again. I'm just coming out of a long-term relationship, and all this stuff, I haven't dated in 13 years. And it's like, oh, God, like all this, like, are you good enough? Do you even know how to date? How do you, like, the whole dating thing has been so weird to me. And there's like this fear of rejection. So I have had to go back to the very, very first prison break question I ever created, which I actually used for business purposes, but totally works for personal purposes as well, is this. If I knew I was 100% loved, supported, and accepted, how would I show up differently in this moment? Right? If I knew I was 100% loved, supported, and accepted, how would I show up in this moment? And so this is not solving the problem of worrying about being rejected. It removes rejection as being problematic because I'm already 100% loved, unconditionally loved, supported, and accepted. I can't be rejected. So if I knew that to be true, and that was the embodiment that I walked out into the world with, I would have no fear of rejection because no matter what somebody says, I already know that I'm 100% loved, supported, and accepted. So it's about figuring out questions for you that help you remove the sting, remove the significance of the thing you're afraid of, and put you in a place of, I already know what's really true for me, and then showing up from that place instead.
Wow, that's awesome. And I love that question. I remember that question. And I think that's a very, very powerful question because it's, I mean, subconsciously, automatically, I think if anybody wants to know the reason for it, it's there are a lot of theories for it, but we have a need to be accepted. We have as human beings, because we are social animals, we have a survival need to be accepted and loved by our parents, by our social groups. So it's a very strong feeling, and we subconsciously act out of, because our environments were not, for most people, they were kind of negative. And like you said, parents mean well, but then they carry on the problems from other generations. Until that goes away, you will have those emotions within you of feeling rejected. And I know it, and that hasn't really helped me, but it has, at least it makes it clear that it's not your fault or your parents' fault or anybody else's fault. It's something that's just been passed on. But like you said, that question, if you're completely loved and accepted and supported, how would you act? Even if that doesn't make you act in that moment, you're training your subconscious to think differently. If you repeat it enough, if you feel it enough. And I love that. And I realize that no matter, and that's the funny thing, most of us live in our heads. And I know that because I do that a lot. I've done that a lot in my past. And I know that a lot of people live in their thoughts. So if you want to change your life, those thoughts have to change into action. So you either act on the crappy thoughts that you have, or you create the thoughts that you want to act on.
Yep.
That's it. That's the bottom line of living a more, what did you say? Self-leader.
Yeah.
And
absolutely. You nailed it.
A self-leader, and leadership starts with that. If you want to lead anybody, lead yourself first. And then you'll automatically lead other people towards a positive direction if you wanted to. And even if you didn't want to, you would inspire people anyway, right?
Yeah, exactly. I actually believe that they're the only form of leadership in my mind is self-leadership. I don't believe you can lead anybody else. I think that you set an example of self-leadership, and people who want to take on self-leadership for themselves, and they give you credit for being a great leader, but all you did was activate their own potential for self-leadership.
That's a great distinction. I love that. I want to cover one more thing if you're up for it. I know I've taken a lot of your time, but one more thing, and this is, I think a lot of people struggle with this, is the time factor. So a lot of people, one, they compare themselves to other people. Well, this person is way ahead of me at my age, or my cousin, or my friend, or whatever. And we hear this a lot. Our parents said, well, look at your cousin, he's doing so much, or look at your friend. We always hear that. One is that time perspective, that we should get certain things. We should buy a house at a certain age. We should have a business at a certain age, or have a great job. We should be married and have kids at a certain age. These are predetermined things that's decided for you within your environments. But I want people to know that you don't really have to act out based on that rule. Right. You don't have to follow those things to the letter. One, that, and the other one is looking at time a certain way. So if you study time enough, you realize that time is a fabrication. It's a system of measurement that we decided. It's a useful system, just like a ruler, but we think it's real, and we act out a lot based on that. So what are your thoughts on that? I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, absolutely. This is, and there's a great book on this as well, is by my mentor and friend, Steve Chandler. He wrote a book called Time Warrior, which you probably have seen before. Yeah, it's a great book. And he talks about kind of it's all about nonlinear time management, right? Because instead of looking at time as linear, it's looking at nonlinear time. And a big part of this, and something that I learned a lot from working with him, and something that I wrote about in the book as well, I think it's in the chapter Intentional Drowning, I think. There's a chapter in Prison Break called Intentional Drowning. And it's funny because, like, there's sorry, probably shouldn't say this part's funny, but there are a number of people who die every year from unintentional drowning, right? Like, God forbid, a kid falls in a pool, or somebody gets drunk and they go swimming. Like, it's an unintentional drowning. But what I believe is that there's just as big of a problem of people who are intentionally drowning. And they are choosing to drown themselves in taking on too many things, and saying yes to too many people, and not setting boundaries in their life, and not being really clear on their singularity of purpose and singularity of focus, and instead being so scattered, being, as Zig Ziglar says, a wandering generality instead of a meaningful specific. There's so much of that going on that essentially we are intentionally drowning ourselves, and then blaming everything else around us, the people, that we don't have enough time, that all these other things. So for me, what I've tried to get better about, and I've gotten really good about this on the professional side, I still really suck at it on the personal side, is being able to set those boundaries where, James Altucher says, if you want to get better at no's, just slow down on your yeses. Right? You don't even have to worry about saying no to things. Just slow down before you say yes to things, and you'll stop piling. You'll stop putting all this self-imposed pressure on yourself, because it's all self-imposed, right? It's all completely self-imposed, that you need to do this by this age, or that you need to have this much done in your career, or you need to be married and have this many kids. It's actually, even if we're hearing it from other people, the only person that can put pressure on us is us. Right? We are the only ones who have that power. And George Pransky, are you familiar with George Pransky he's a Three Principles guy? I don't know if you've heard of him before. So George Pransky's great. He's the only person who speaks slower than Steve Chandler. He's an older guy, but amazing, really, really awesome. And he did a seminar one time where he offered, actually, it wasn't even a seminar. I think he walked up and down the Venice Boardwalk in California and was trying to sell a t-shirt. And he said, I will sell you this t-shirt for $200. And I 100% guarantee that it will block any stress and any pressure that originates outside of you. Right? 100% guarantee that this t-shirt will completely take away any outside pressure, any outside stress. And he's so right, because he obviously understands where all that stuff comes. It's all self-imposed. So I think the first thing is recognizing that it's all self-imposed, right? That nobody really has any power over you with that. And the second thing is, it's really a moment-by-moment choice. So I have a list of probably, 20 or 25 kind of affirmations that I anchor myself into every morning. I have a list of things that I read, and I read it from a very high energy, enthusiastic state. Like, even if I'm not feeling it, I just get up, I have a little 2-minute dance party, some gangster rap, and then I bring up my affirmations, and they're all I am statements, right? And they're I am this, I am that, I am doing this, I am whatever. And one of them is, I am never overwhelmed or under a time crunch, because I control my relationship to time. I am never overwhelmed or under a time crunch because I control my relationship to time. So if my relationship to time is there's never enough of it, then I have no choice to feel overwhelmed and like I'm under a time crunch. If my relationship to time is that there's always the perfect amount of time to do the things that matter, then I'm never overwhelmed or under a time crunch. So that's my own personal view on how I view time and whether we have enough or or we have too much or just enough. Like that's the way I deal with that.
That's awesome. I like that perspective. And I just wanted to mention this in terms of time, because I mean, every person I've worked with, they think about time is like, I don't have enough time. And when you actually dive deep into their life, and I've done that even with myself, is that when you dive deep, you realize that it's not that you don't have time. And this is a funny thing, that how do people, my mentor told me this, Brent Burchard, he's like, everybody has 24 hours in a day, or let's say 16, 17 hours in a waking time. Why is it that some people can get more done versus other people? And a lot of people assume that, well, that person doesn't have the challenges that I do. That person doesn't have this. Everybody has challenges. No matter where you are, everybody has challenges. That's one thing. And the other thing is that it's not really the time that's stopping people. When you actually look into, if you anybody listening to this, if you actually sit down and figure out what you do, your pattern every day on a day-to-day basis, you'll notice that you will waste a lot of time. A lot of professionals do this, and we've actually talked about this in your book as well, that you used to do this, that they will have a lot of things to do, but instead of doing that, they would go on Amazon or on YouTube or do something else. And I have clients who tell me, he's like, I get distracted by YouTube. I'm like, then why do you have it in front of you? But we all do it. We waste a lot of time, whether thinking about something, overthinking about it, or going and watching something or something else while we have something important to do for us that we've decided.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
presence is so important.
The time.
Yeah, that presence. So just be with the thing you're doing 100%. Like that alone will change so much. Just being fully present and not worrying about other things and not trying to multitask again. And everybody who's listening to this has probably heard 1,000 times, don't multitask, and yet you're still doing it. So try, like give it, you don't have to believe it. This is something I always say. And again, I learned from my mentor, you don't have to believe or not believe. You don't have to agree or not agree. You don't have to trust or not trust. Just test this stuff for yourself for a little while. And maybe you'll get nothing out of it. Fine. Then you can go back to being stressed out and overwhelmed all the time. No problem. If you just put that on hold for a little while and test this stuff. And worst case scenario, you go back to how you already were. No harm, no foul.
Yeah, and that's an amazing point, and I love that, because that's also the Zen perspective as well. And then if you look at Zen Buddhism, you're not meant to believe anything in anything. Right. It's not a system of faith or belief where you have to believe something before you do anything. You have to try everything, and that's actually a very natural thing to human beings. If you watch children, I mean, I have a 2.5-year-old daughter. I've learned so much from her, and all you do is I'll tell you one last story, and then we'll end the interview. But so. This happened like a few months ago, and this like shocked me to my core. So I'm sitting down doing a puzzle with her, and I think she was 2 years old at that time. She loves puzzles. So we're doing a puzzle, and I'm trying to think, okay, that goes here. And I'm in my head and I'm thinking about it. And within like 3 minutes, she's done half of it. And I'm still thinking about which puzzle goes where. I'm like, oh my God. And all she's doing, she doesn't know where it goes. She's just trying. She's just trying different variations of it. And I'm like, oh my God, this is what I do in my life. I just overthink things. And while I'm doing this, the time goes by. Yep.
Kids always get it, man. Kids are the best teachers because they don't have all the crap yet.
Yeah, they don't have it yet, and hopefully we won't instill in it.
No, they will. They'll have it because that's just the way it works. That all the well-meaning people will give them crap, and then it'll be their own fun job to unlearn the stuff they've learned.
Okay, I mean, there's so much we can cover, but hopefully we've covered enough to deliver that value, hopefully to your audience and mine. And I really want to thank you, and it's been such an honor talking to you, and I loved our conversation. I mean, I could continue this for another 7 hours. I know. But thinking of the time constraints that we've set up for ourselves.
Right, yes. Our own time commitments, not time constraints, right?
Time commitments, yeah. Language, I got to pay attention to my language. So once again, thank you very much for that. And I want you to go ahead and Jason has a great offer for you guys that you guys can take advantage of. And you can let them know where they can find your book.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I want to give everybody who's a listener of the show a copy of Prison Break. So I'll give you a link that Faisal will share with the show notes, I'm sure. So you can get a free copy of Prison Break. You get a digital copy or an audio copy, or if you're in the States, you can pay a couple bucks for shipping and handling, and I'll send you a free physical copy. So I'll give you a website that you can use for that. It's just getprisonbreak.com/Faisal. So getprisonbreak.com/Faisal, and then you'll be able to get a free copy of the book. And I hope you absolutely love it and enjoy it, and come friend me on Facebook or follow me on Instagram, and let me know what you thought.
Yeah, and that's an awesome book, and it's an amazing offer because like I said in the beginning, I've listened to the audiobook 3 times, and I'd love to actually read it once too, because you absorb the material differently when you read it than when you listen to it. Totally. But highly recommend it. Read his material, and I also know you can just introduce that because I work with a lot of professionals and entrepreneurs. You do work with entrepreneurs as well. You have the other side of your business as well, so they can follow you on Instagram for that as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, I share some pretty valuable content for entrepreneurs, especially service-based entrepreneurs, on my Facebook and Instagram. So you probably won't see any pictures of my lunch, but you'll see some good stuff you can actually use in your life. So I hope that's a good trade-off.
Yeah, and I've been following Jason for the past few months, and it's great material. I love his delivers a lot of value. And I want to give you guys my offer. So if you want to actually, and it's a new beginning, a way to change your life for the better, way to improve on what you're doing, or recreate what you want to do playfully, hopefully, then you can actually go to my webpage where I offer a 90-minute strategy session where you can raise your level of clarity in your life, clarity in terms of who you are, what you do in life, how you look at your relationships, raise your level of energy, your mental, physical, emotional, raise your level of productivity, your level of influence with yourself, first of all, and raise your level of courage, deal with your fears in a better way. So if you want to take advantage of that, I'll have both of the links posted below. Mine, one is faisalinsan.com /P/coaching. Okay, and that's it. Thank you very much, Jason.
Thank you. My pleasure, brother. Thanks for having me.